Okay, welcome Will, Wain-Williams and Brendan Tunks to In Discussion With. I'm really happy we got this done. We're getting this done. Welcome. How are you guys doing?
Thanks. Good, thanks.
Good, thank you, good.
So this particular discussion is different to our podcast. I'm sure you watched the last episode. If you haven't, I'll just go over it quickly again. I have a few topics that we're going to cover which are specific, and then we've got some questions from the public that you guys will answer as well. And its focus is, of course, insect foo. In your case, Tang Lang Quan, mantis. Maybe you can just give a little bit of a brief introduction of yourselves first. And on my screen, Will is on top. So, Will, you go first. I'm not going to do this in any other order except for how it was presented on the screen.
Okay, so I don't know what to say now. I moved to China in 2007, and then I was living in Shandong province, first in Qingdao and then Yantai. So I trained Taiji Mantis for pretty much most of that time, up until I left China just at the beginning of 2020.
Okay, Taiji Mantis. All right, we'll get into the details of that, but for the most part, most people probably think Taiji Mantis is what senior citizen mantids do in their spare time.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that in a second. All right, Brendan, please do go ahead.
Yep, how's it going, everyone? For those that haven't heard before or maybe checked the podcast we did last time, I've been practicing mantis boxing for about 30 years, and majority of that, but not all, has been 7-star mantis boxing. And I've practiced other styles as well, and I still do. So a bit of Taiji, a bit of Taiji Meihua, so Plum Blossom, and a little bit of even 6 Harmony Mantis. So I've done lots of other martial arts, and I cross-train now too. But yeah, my specialty and my style that I practice till the day I die will be mantis boxing.
All right, very cool. So with that started, I mean, as we've gotten those backgrounds, we already know that there's quite a few different styles and streams of mantis. But what are the origins of mantis? Do they all come off the same source?
Do you want to go first, Will?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, this is kind of like a bit of a contentious thing that's kind of debated back and forth quite a lot. I mean, the common origin story is that it was created by a guy called Wang Lang, and he lost a fight, and then he went off into the woods and saw a mantis catch a cicada, blah, 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 and then the style was formed. But my personal opinion, I think it's more likely something that just sort of evolved organically in the area. You know, it's just something that people were doing in the Shandong Peninsula, and sort of gradually they came to put a name on it as Tang Lang Quan. So I'm kind of starting to think now that I don't think there is really like a single origin, you know.
Okay.
I kind of agree with most of that. I just let everybody know too, I have actually got some notes for 2 reasons. One, I've got the memory of a goldfish at the moment, and secondly, I've translated a lot of what I would be normally relaying in Chinese into English. Firstly, because my Chinese is shit, and secondly, because majority of people listening can't speak Chinese, and also a lot of people who practice mantis boxing, for example, use Cantonese terminology. So whenever I'm looking at this paper, I'm not going to hide it. I'm going to hold it up. I'm going to read straight from it, because there's some things in there that I might have to use when I answer questions that have been translated into English, and some prompts as well, because I'm becoming senile. But so it's late Qing origins, but we kind of know that for sure. And possibly has roots much earlier than that. I mean, there's references to mantis warriors in Chinese, like military texts going back. I mean, I could be wrong, but, as the Han period. So there's obviously no direct relationship between that, but there's been, references to mantis techniques and, mantis fists in other styles. And, you even see in things like Xing Liu He, but doesn't necessarily mean I'm saying it's related. But the idea of mantis in martial arts has been around for probably longer than the systems that we have today. Mm-hmm. But the systems that we have today, like that both Will and I practice, you can say pretty safely that the origins are in the late Qing. And the oldest manuscripts sort of from around the 1760s, and they were written or at least compiled by a person who used the Taoist sobriquet Shengshao Doren, who's like the heavenly ascended Taoist or something along those lines. But they're actually Shaolin texts. So there's 4 volumes, and one of them was in its introduction. It even basically says that this was handed down to me from Fuzhou, from the Shaolin Temple. So I mean, he's a Taoist monk apparently, this Shengshao person, but those texts are straight up Shaolin, and they do look like at least part of them, or they're imported. Whether they come from the style that predated Mantis, but at least parts of it definitely come from the Shaolin tradition. And I mean, they even say so in the text. That's the origin of them. But so the first kind of generation of Mantis boxes that we can kind of we can historically verify, their manuscripts all incorporate these 4 volumes that came from this Shengshao Daoren. So it's historically verifiable. Mantis is probably closer from, the 1850, 1900, that era. And then, these are people that actually did exist. The oldest manuscripts come from Will's family. The oldest ones that aren't attributed to this mysterious figure who may or may not have existed. And he may have. There are, a couple of, there's people who are looking at the origins of him, and also whether or not Wang Long is a historical figure,
right.
historically verifiable figure. And there's a couple of candidates for people that may possibly have been Wang Long, and same also now for this Taoist as well. But yes, who knows if we'll ever verify that they did exist. So we're really the earliest people that we know that were practicing what we know as Mantis boxing today was the originator of Will style, and the predecessor of the originator of 7-star Mantis boxing. Okay,
it's really interesting. I mean, the same attribution of a Daoren or a Taoist is attributed from one of the first texts written on Bodhidharma's marrow washing. The
Yeah, it's quite a similar name.
And Zining Daoren was his name, which is purple coagulation, man of the way. And it's what's interesting is that they're Taoists, and Shaolin is Buddhist, and it's Chan Buddhist. I mean, it's not just So it's interesting how, I mean, we'll never really know if these people were Taoists or they were it was written in the name of somebody, or because they were kind of mishmashing those concepts in China anyway. They were just so popular. But it is really interesting. It's a very similar type of a situation. So you were saying that Will's is some of the oldest writings or the oldest streams. What are the various streams, and how do they split off, and from where to where?
Do you want to go, Will?
So as far as I know, 6 Harmony Mantis or Liu He Tanglang, that branched out quite a bit earlier. And that's something I'll let Brendan talk about, because I don't know anything about 6 Harmony Mantis. But like Plum Blossom Mantis, and then Taiji Mantis and Taiji Plum Blossom Mantis, these 3 are all like one sort of main group, and then 7-star Mantis is kind of the other main group. And these, I would say, sort of came about at like a similar time, sort of mid to late 19th century. And as Brendan just said before, that's really the time when like what we would recognize as Mantis started to come about. So like, there was other teachers before that, but we don't really know very much about what they were doing.
So those were just groupings under the general umbrellas of Meihua Taiji Tanglang Quan. Was it already set in with that terminology way back when?
Oh, so the first guy to really make like a clear record, a clear sort of well-written trempo, was Liang Xuexiang. That was sort of like 1850-ish. People ascribe him as the founder of Plum Blossom, but he actually just called what he did Mantis. He didn't actually put a name on it. It's actually his students' generation that started to call it Plum Blossom, and then one generation after that, Songzide renamed it Taiji Mantis, and then sort of similar sort of time, people started to also call it Taiji Meihua. So it kind of all got a little bit like, messy, but basically they all come from the same root.
Okay.
So 7 stars a bit simpler. The predecessor of Seven Star, who in some families of Seven Star would include as the first generation, technically isn't. It was actually coined, named, and there are records by who is correctly attributed as the founder in 1893. So I was getting mixed up there because I always it's 10 years after the founding of judo by Jigoro Kano, so that helps to give a bit of perspective about when Seven Star came about.
Well, I'm glad you didn't say it's 10 years after the year you were born, because, you know.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, looking at me in this camera now, I would say that's pretty accurate. Yeah. So, but however, that's a guy, Wang Yunchun or Wang Yusheng, and his teacher was a person called Kuai Shou Li, so lightning hand or fast hand Li, and he's a practitioner of what was probably the original Mantis that Liang Shuishang also probably learned, which is basically just Mantis. There was no division at this point, and so there's a core bunch of forms which we can safely say existed because they were passed down on both the Seven Star side and the Taiji side.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that includes Luanjie, Bengbu, and Batou. So there's dividing the body into 12 elbows, and there's also probably there's a series of forms in Mantis boxing called Jiao, and it's like the 6 essentials, later on 7, but there was probably most likely a proto one single long version of that as well at the generation before the two major families were named. So it was just Mantis boxing back then, and the original Seven Star manuscripts talk about this person who taught Wang Yunchun, and he referred to it as Mantis boxing. So it was Mantis boxing or Mantis hand, or that's what it was. And so we clearly know when these new lineages
diverged,
but they did come from one. Whether or not there was a even further back predecessor that was different again, and looking at the old manuscripts, you would think that it was something different, and it had a different name back then. It was called like 18 Lohan Duanda, like short boxing. So whether or not that name was taken from elsewhere, or whether those manuscripts were adopted and morphed into Mantis boxing manuscripts, we will never probably know. But and some of the techniques and things that do exist in Mantis boxing today that come out of those ancient manuscripts could also have been retrofit to fit the manuals.
Oh yeah,
that's another. But there is one of those 4 original manuals which outlines the 18 Lohan Qigong, so Lohan Gong, and it's like it still exists, and it passed down through both sides of the family, and it's pretty much unchanged. So we can see at least one of those manuscripts has a continuous transmission. So there is a link to those old documents, and there is actually a link to the generations before. Whether or not a lot of it is different, at least a chunk of it has come down, and you'll find at the core of all the Chuanpo of all the different families, we all have these 4 manuscripts that came down. So
that Shiba Lohan that's referred to, which is a pretty common, it's a very important depiction in Chan Buddhism. Have you? I'm sure you're familiar with some of the depictions of them, like Fuhu Lohan, taming the tiger Lohan, Xianglong Lohan, like enticing the dragon Lohan. How similar are the Shiba Lohan in this that in your Mantis system to those depictions? Do they have similar names? Do they have similar concepts to what is being portrayed in those concepts of the Shiba Lohan in the 18 Lohan in Buddhism?
Yeah, I think some of the names are, whether or not, and I mean also a lot of it, without saying it's the same, maps onto the other versions of Lohan Gong that exist in Shaolin boxing or Lohan Quan. So it's pretty similar to the like muscle and tendon change, or what is it? Yeah, so I mean, but I shouldn't talk too much about Lohan Gong. I don't even practice it. I practiced a version when I was younger, and I am not an authority on it, and I don't practice it now because I find that I can get similar or the same or better benefits from other practices. It's a very important thing, should be maintained, and needs to be preserved, but I'm not the expert on it, and not even practicing it. I'm probably the last person that should be speaking on it. But from a just a Mantis boxing perspective, interest in the heritage, it's definitely something that needs to be preserved and passed on, but it won't be passed on. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And just to add to that, in Taiji Mantis, we actually don't do the 18 Lohan Gong. We have a different exercise that's kind of evolved out of it called San Hui Jiu Zhuan Lohan Gong. So that means 3 returns, 9 rotations. And it's actually just one part of the 18 Lohan Gong, which we use as like a sort of iron body conditioning form. And then we also do a Baduan Jin. And some of those Baduan Jin movements, it's completely different to like regular Baduan Jin that you see. But some of those Baduan Jin movements are actually from that original 18 Lohan Gong.
Okay.
So we kind of have like the whole practice, but it's just been sort of like rearranged and rewired.
When you say that what did you call it? San Hui Zhou.
San Hui Jiu Zhuan Lohan Gong.
And what is it in a nutshell? What does it contain or comprise of?
It's just like a short qigong set where you do like a few different postures with with different breathing. Like so you're breathing with the lower dantian and then the middle dantian, and then you're doing these various postures, and then like the teacher basically has this big baton.
And he beats you.
Whack you.
Okay.
Yeah, like along certain meridians in like a certain
We
order.
have a similar thing in our Bagua lineage, which has also got the naming of 9 cycles, and we also breathe and hit ourselves, but we actually hit ourselves. We pat our bodies in a specific locations in a specific cycle. So yeah, I mean these things overlap. There must have been some very pervasive practices in northern China dating back then that a lot of people did that they incorporated into their martial arts. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, from what I heard, this is something to do with, this is sort of like been passed down from Taoist like internal alchemy, but it's just, I guess people found it's also beneficial for martial arts being hit really hard with a baton, so it kind of got involved into it.
Well, it's in the Yi Jing Jing as well, hitting yourself with things and hitting yourself with bags filled with rocks and things like that. So it's part of it. But for us, we have yang points and yin points, and they correlate to different surfaces of the body. I'm sure the outside surface is considered yang, the inside is yin, and we pat them in a cycle. So those are the zhou. The zhou is actually probably referring to those yin and yang cycles, those points and the sequence that you hit. It's quite interesting. That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have a truncated version of that as well without the same baton, because the baton that they use in their family is actually a very specific tool, has to be made in a certain way. There's usually someone who can make them or they're passed down. And we have the same kind of patting and beating, but during our barehanded practice, so the 8 postures, and also in standing different positions, but less formalized, similar breathing, but not a full routine. Like I think when you see that version practiced, it's quite a long set. It takes quite a while from start to finish. So we've got a very truncated version of some of the key parts of that, and who knows whether it was stolen from these guys or not. But there's been a fair bit of like cross-pollination or stealing as well over the years. Yeah.
I think nowadays it's just more common all around for all lineages just to do like when you right at the beginning of the system, like the first thing you learn is just your basic 8 stances. And, while you're standing in your stance, your teacher will just come and like kind of pat you and give you like a whack in your dantian and,
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's specific counts for the number of smacks, of course, and the direction that a whipping sort of, down the leg, a sweeping strike, which like basically goes along the leg and has to be done in a certain direction. And so I didn't pay attention to a lot of that stuff. I just stood there and received it. And it took me a while. Sometimes I didn't even work out till later what I was training in. So I kind of went through that kind of training as well without even asking any questions or really knowing what it was. So interesting. Some people are smart enough right when they begin training to start delving in deeply, and I kind of didn't really ask many questions ever.
It's interesting because if you look at Okinawan karate and they do sanchin or sanjan, and the teacher like sits there and whacks, and I know it's a lot of it is to do with checking and testing and conditioning, but it might actually result or have a root in the same meridian hitting practices that we're talking about here. I mean, because even when I learned it with my teacher, he would have me hit myself, and in the beginning it would be like it would be something like this, that's and then later on he'd actually tell me to start really, as you get it more developed, you hit yourself harder and harder and harder.
Yeah.
And it's got function of both the internal aspect as well as conditioning. So, I mean, that's probably where a lot of the functional training came from, right? So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so I wanted to ask, what are the main principles of 7-star?
Right. Well, in my opinion, the principles of 7-star and Taiji Tanglang are pretty. I mean, men's boxing principles are actually pretty universal.
Are they
to be
the
honest.
same? So this was actually, I was going to ask you one by one, but I didn't know if there's overlap or if there's differences.
There is overlap, and there are some slight differences, but the core principles are basically the same. And you've got some some theoretical basis to say that. You've got things like the 12 keywords, so they're kind of like a mnemonic that talks about 12 key principles of Mantis boxing. They vary between the families, but each family has them. But in some families, it goes up to even 36 keywords. So that's one thing. And then there's other things like, different stratagem or sonnets and things like the 8 hard and 12 flexible techniques, 7 long and 8 short techniques, 8 fatal and 8 non-fatal attacks. So these kind of things are at the core of all of our sort of theory and in our manuscripts. And the principles for combat are basically the same, in my opinion. The way they look, in the way you train things, the flavors that you sort of demonstrate when you move, that's where you see differences. But if we're talking about principles, I think they're the same. I mean, I'll talk a little bit later because I know one of the questions or a couple of the questions are asking about characteristics of 7-star. So defining it, and then that's more where you'll see differentiation in the way 7-star people move, for example. They are differences, but they're not differences in principle, especially not in combat principle. And to me, all I really actually care about are combat principles. So I was just thinking, I did take some notes here, and I was thinking to say that like a very simple way to describe the main combat principles comes from what we have in our family, which is like the 7-star Mantis combat regulations. And an English translation of that is, so we're talking about character principles that are common to both of us rather than different.
Right.
Attack above, strike below. Attack below, strike above. Attack left, strike right. Attack right, strike left. Empty and solid, hard and soft, fast and slow. Heavy, light, strong and weak. Big and small, all functioning in conjunction. You don't attack, I wait. You attack, I beat you to the punch, I intercept. Right. You enter directly, I dodge to the side. You retreat, I gain ground. You push, I pull. If you pull me, then I push you. And so these are like key, and if you bend me, I yield. So they're just like really common Northern Chinese boxing principles. They're nothing unique to Mantis boxing, but they kind of encapsulate the sort of key things that you'll see in terms of like at least combat theory for all this stuff in Mantis boxing. So,
and a lot of those are shared in other styles, as you mentioned.
They are.
Like Taiji, Xingyi Quan, there's a text called The Crossing Hands, about crossing hands, which is literally a text about application, about when you're actually, how to use the art. And there's a lot of things that you just said that are the same. The same ideas. And like I said, Taiji's got that famous thing. If you don't move, I don't move. When you move, I arrive first, so that kind of idea.
I think this is in our family is probably ripped off from that. And I think also the Taiji manuscripts are probably some of the best well-written and most kind of like high level in terms of like their language and content. And I think they did influence like a lot of different, the writings of many schools after that. It kind of set a bar standard for like, talking about things, extremely poetical and like highly developed theory. Whereas I think really a lot of the Mantis boxing stuff is quite hands-on, common, simple, but when you read the various families' different manuscripts, and who knows how recent that is, because it's probably not even that old, and it's from my family, so it's not ancient at all. They've definitely borrowed from other places, but the theory is simple. Like hiding solid inside empty, hiding speed inside slow technique. So a lot of like feinting, a lot of like putting something out there. If it doesn't get stopped, going through. If it hits something, wrapping and folding around it. So, and the key principles are basically just attacking in waves, continuous action, a lot of combinations. So yeah, I probably should let Will jump in.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead, Will. What do you have to add there?
Well, I was just going to say that, so just to take it back to the, the first thing we were talking about, the original oldest manuscripts from the Heavenly Ascended Taoist. A lot of the principles Brendan is talking about just then are principles that were like written down in that manual. So they very much like predate
the breaking down of styles,
the separation into styles. Right. And predate sort of anything that we know of as Mantis. So I suppose, they're like common across, across all branches. But regarding Taiji Mantis specifically, the reason we're called Taiji Mantis, so just to get back to what you're saying right at the beginning about, old people's Mantis, the reason we're called Taiji Mantis is Taiji, as you know, is like the principle of yin and yang, the interplay of opposites, right? So the poem that Brendan just said about, striking up, striking low, fainting to the outside, moving to the inside, up and down, in and out, all of this stuff. All those like paired opposites are kind of really like why we're called Taiji Mantis.
I see.
Yeah.
So it's not actually to say like Taiji Mantis has these principles, but other styles don't. It's more just a case of like the founder of Taiji Mantis, I suppose, thought that this was like, such a great text or such great ideas that he's like, I want to name the whole style after this. Whereas, Seven Star has like principles that also exist, but just, the focus of the founder was like, he took inspiration from something else.
I see.
Except for in his Tremple, he also talks about Taiji and also how that gives birth to the two, which gives birth to the blah, and it's basically just an expression of how in Mantis boxing, sorry to cut you off, Will, basically it's like it's all about expressing that Mantis boxing is delivered or used almost like as you can imagine almost like an atom, the nucleus in the middle and the electrons basically going like around in every direction. So all of the attacks are basically like continuous waves of attacks moving in circles, in every direction, coming forward and like basically creating an impenetrable, not a sphere, but that's kind of one of the keys that crosses over both of the families. And even though the name isn't derived from that in our family, it still refers to the same stuff. There's definitely a lot of reference to like Taoist metaphysics and all those kind of, what I mean. So yeah, they have the name and it's embedded in their theory, but even in Seven Star, it's referred to. In fact, the founder of Seven Star himself was a practicing Taoist, I don't know, like lay priest or whatever, and he incorporated like Taoist methods into. It's particularly only in one sort of stream of the family that came down directly from him. It's like not in my side of the family, but So I mean, he studied on a guy who was like basically a Taoist priest as well, studied long fists under him, Yantai, and so Seven Star has definitely got that kind of influence as well. But yeah, the name comes from something totally different.
So we just spoke about, Will just said that the name Taiji Tanglang is referring to the theory of Taiji, and those aspects of opposites being used together or, combined together. Yeah. But what is Seven Star, the naming, referring to?
So the old popular story that used to be, the most common description was that the seven stars, where there's a constellation Qixing in, whether it's the Big Dipper, I think it is. And so at its most simple level, you can relate the seven stars to the seven major parts of the body. And so that was all about, moving in cohesion the same way as you have the internal and external three harmonies or six harmonies. But it's almost certain that it's in fact named after the family home of the founder, which was Qingdao. So yeah, and it's named after the North Star of the constellation or whatever. So he basically just called it after his his family home. And this actually wasn't particularly widely known or acknowledged until we can say fairly recently. It was amongst people that directly had a connection to that family, whereas a lot of Seven Star Mantis sort of folklore that was widely spread around the world comes from the writings of a master from Hong Kong called Wang Hongfan. So, that the particular origin stories that were written in those books became really widely disseminated, and so there's some things that are universally accepted but are not necessarily don't align with people's knowledge in certain places. So newer knowledge has come to the table in recent years.
Right.
I mean, it's not universally agreed either, because the founder, this Wang Xiaohua, he has like descendants, and in his descendants are also in the Dongbei region, not just Yantai. And so there's a school of seven-star mantis there who consider themselves as the orthodox school of seven-star mantis, and they do hold his manuscripts. And there is people who have blood descendancy from this founder, and so some of their their knowledge or what they hold as orthodox transmission isn't the same as what other people in there are actually various streams of seven star. So it isn't actually one single lineage. There's seven big lineages, and they're quite different. So but they've got a whole set of manuscripts, I think 12, that are passed down from the founder, but obviously those were built upon or added to by his grandson and then his grandson's disciples. So it's kind of like a living document.
Right.
But the core elements of those manuscripts are also found in the manuscripts of all the rest of the seven-star family. But yeah, some of the historical knowledge that's captured in those is pretty specific. Talks about exact dates when things occurred, and obviously some of that is debatable, but a lot of it is pretty solid and hard to argue with.
So you mentioned Kuixing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is also a deity in Chinese folklore.
So that demon-looking deity who you see his leg up with the sort of, I think he's got another eye in his head, and he's
a scholar actually. He usually is holding a calligraphy brush.
In his righto. They've got kind of like almost a logo, which is like a deity. I don't think it's.
He is a deity. Apparently, he was really ugly. I can't. It's been so long since I've looked at that folklore. But I remember he was a very ugly deity. He was a scholar who was deemed too ugly, but he was a scholar.
That's why I practice seven star. That's why I chose it. Yeah.
But you'll actually.
So this is the guy, because he's actually quite ugly. He looks like a demon. You see paintings of him. Yeah. It is the same one. So. Yeah.
So if you see even in Chen style Taiji when they do jian, and they pick the sword up and stand with one knee, and they've got the finger. They pick the sword up above their head, and they've got the finger. Actually, they're imitating the constellation.
Yeah, right.
And the fingers are pointing towards that specific star.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so there's
it's the top of the handle or the top of the thing of the Big Dipper. So
yeah,
I think. So most commonly it's to do with the seven stars with the seven parts of the body, but actually it turns out it's really to do with the family hall of the founder, and that's what he named it after.
Okay.
And hard to argue against that. So there you go.
All right.
But the seven star theory, the body being like feet, knees, hips, shoulder, elbow,
head.
It is part, and it's like no different from any other style where they divide the body into these convenient sections, and it's about moving in an integrated fashion with cohesion. So that's on the other side of what the seven star is about. And there is also techniques in the style, including a stance or a kick and a stance, which is the seven star stance. So yeah, but that's also the same stance as in Taiji as well. So, and it's in also Will's style too.
Okay, you don't have any references to this seven star and Kuixing in Taiji Mantis.
I'm trying to think. Maybe there's a seven-star sword, a form called Qingjian, although I haven't learnt it, but I think there is one maybe in our lineage.
Okay, that's interesting.
But I think it's just really a case of like the terms they're just common terms in all Chinese martial art, like seven-star, Taiji, and then I was going to just mention Plum Blossom as well.
Oh, Meihua, of course.
The other one, yeah. Because that again is like a really common term in Chinese martial arts. And in Mantis, it specifically refers to, so like the seven star was saying the common story is like the seven parts of the body. So when you're talking about Plum Blossom, you're referring to like
the petals,
the body, kind of like 5 petals. So again, it's the same idea of like moving the whole body in unison.
Oh, that's quite interesting. Yeah, and that's also common terminology. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it also just means multi-directional as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like all these numbers. I think we talked about it before. 3, 5, 7, 9. You know, like these numbers. Like for example, there's a lot of movements that repeat in Mantis forms. So there might be a movement, and you'll see somebody do this form, and they'll repeat the movement 3 times, whereas another will do it once or twice. But it'll always be either, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, 18. So it's just reps of these it's Chinese numerology. It's everywhere. It's very common in all.
Right.
I thought real quick as well, I just say about on the Plum Blossom thing. I've seen some talk of people trying to say that like it's some kind of connection to the Boxer Rebellion, but I don't think that's the case at all. Because
why would they say that though?
Because they're trying to relate it to Mei Hua Quan or Mei Hua Zhuang, the style.
Oh, okay. Which the Boxers are quite connected to.
Yeah, but I mean, the Shandong Peninsula was like pretty far removed from the whole Boxer uprising thing. So I don't think there's anything to do with that. I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So what you're saying is then that can we say that Mei Hua was established at roughly the same time, though, as the Boxer Rebellion?
No, I think earlier, really, because...
So then there wouldn't be a connection. And
yeah.
And then it would, if that is the connection, then Mei Hua Tanglang Quan would have practices in terms of martial practices that resemble Mei Hua Zhuang and Mei Hua Quan, which I don't think it does.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah. Maybe it was cool back in the day to attribute yourself to the Boxers because they were initially patriots, right? And anyway. All right, so we've kind of we've got those public questions, but what are there any key differences between 7-star and Taiji that are stark? I mean, contrasts and differences.
Yeah, I mean, I think mainly the main difference really is the curriculum. Massive difference. I mean, we share those core old forms, but in 7-star you get like anywhere between 25 to 80 plus forms, which is nothing like that in the Taiji or Mei Hua side. So, that's one very very different thing. The curriculum, and also some of the training methods, but in application, there's very little difference, in my opinion. When you fight with Mantis boxing, it's exactly the same. But it's a little bit of a generalization, but I think you can say that 7-star is less compact than Taiji Tanglang.
Okay.
And so it has a long fist base actually. Well, it has long fist, not a base, but a very strong long fist component because that was the background of the founder, and he actually did incorporate some of that, whether he intended to or not. And not only that, there's also been forms that have come into our system that came out from outside long fist styles, like Mizong Chuan and some from Taizu Chang Chuan, things like that. So there is, as a result, more extension. You see like longer, sometimes deeper stances. There's much more rotation around the spine, especially with the shoulders. So shoulders moving like in full extension, dropped low, back square, but then full twisting this way, twisting in a different way. I mean, you still have techniques like this, especially in, I think, what you might consider to be lower level forms in Taiji Tanglang. Will can speak on that, but there seems to be a greater emphasis on, driving the power through the legs, up the back, and lashing out through the arms. So basically, that's that kind of like in our like 7 long, we talk about like a method of power generation, which is from Han Tong's Tongbei. And it's not the Tongbei where people think of today, Tongbei Chuan, but Tongbei being
the concept,
an old nickname for long fist.
Yeah.
And so, it's a concept, but whenever we're referring to Tongbei as one of the sort of mother, sort of one of the key components that helped build Mantis boxing, we're just basically, I think, talking about classical long fist. So 7-star definitely has that kind of like long extension, a lot of like thrusting linear strikes, long range chopping strikes. We tend to extend the limbs further, so limbs still retract, and we also do have short boxing as well, because at the core all Mantis boxing really is Duanda, but there is definitely a long fist component in 7-star. So apart from the curriculum, it's that is being a major difference.
Okay, cool.
Will,
anything from you, Will, about this topic?
Yeah, I think that's sort of it, really. I mean, 7-star, I'd say, is like a sort of big... Would you say like a bigger frame style?
I think so.
I think that's a kind of a way to say it. Like, the arms tend to, like, sort of leave the body a bit more. Whereas Taiji Mantis is more like you keep the arms kind of much more in, and you rely on like twisting and coiling the body a lot more. So there's kind of a lot more like body movement and a lot less
extension,
if that makes sense. Yeah.
There's differences in the power generation and power expression. So I'll let Will explain, for example, about this short power that's in Taiji Tanglang. That is one of the differences.
Yeah, so, I mean, pretty much just that. It's like more sort of keeping the arms kind of in and down, and then using, like, you're kind of getting the wind-up, I guess you would say, from, like, twisting and coiling the body behind the arms. And then I think one of the differences, I don't think you guys do, like, dynamic tension stuff in any of your forms, do you?
No, so I was sort of getting at that with the short power stuff. Like the way that you guys play Bartol, for example, is different to the way that we do. And so there is that kind of like dynamic tension type stuff in Will's material. And so when you see the forms, you'll see them move in a way which is much like you have some constriction and then an explosion, but at a short range, and it's much more sort of like torque, as in like engine torque. And so, I don't really think I can't think of anything at least in our forms, which is like a dynamic tension, or there's no like slow motion movements under tension. There is a mix of speeds. The rhythms are different. I think the rhythms in 7 Star are a little bit different, but I think like this kind of like slow, heavy, explosive, short range power is a characteristic of Will's style from my perspective.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's something that's focused on more like at the advanced level. So when you learn the Bajo sets, which the full name is Fenshen Bajo, which means dividing the body into 8 joints. So like you're striking with the various joints of the body. And so the way we're doing that is we're taking that sort of Neigong, using like the dynamic tension that you do in like the Lohan Gong or something, where you're tensing and pushing and pulling like this. A bit sort of like you'd see in like Sanshin in karate. So we're taking that sort of like way of moving, but at the same time there's a lot of like really extreme coiling and twisting while like holding the body in tension. So that's like kind of our main way of training power generation.
Okay.
It's not universal, but in the Meihua sort of greater Taiji Meihua stream, because for example Taiji Meihua expresses it differently again. They're kind of more like 50% between us and what Will's talking about.
Yeah.
So you get a whole spectrum. But yeah.
That's interesting. All right. Then the last one of our general topics before we go on to the public's questions was common myths and misunderstandings of Mantis.
I got one.
Do it.
Well, it's a quick one. I think one of the most common myth is that people think that like the hook is the distinguishing, unique characteristic of Mantis boxing, and that Mantis boxing is all about the hook. And also people dead set think that the hook, the double hooks, this is the guard of Mantis boxing. It's absolutely not at all. That's complete bullshit. It's not a guard at all. And you'll even see people on some of these for a while there, China was doing this TV program where they were trying to people on Leitai, and they were fighting, and they were sort of demonstrating their characteristics of their styles, and you would see the Mantis fighters coming out and circling their opponent with
bobbing up and down.
Absolutely not at all. It's not a guard position whatsoever. The guard position is either double palms, double fist, or a palm and a fist, or a fist and an elbow. It's never a guard, so that's one. So you got any, Will?
Is there just 1 second though? So we can't really, as people like to call Mantis an imitative style, it's not really an imitative style, is it?
Look, I think it's the only thing in it that's imitative is like kind of the spirit, I suppose. But in terms of like movement, nothing at all. There's a couple of movements where like the double ceiling hands, or the Mantis catches cicada, which is the one we see like this. It does look like a Mantis. Right? Let's not fool ourselves, but that's the extent of it. People used to call it an imitative style, but that's because it was grouped in with the Shang routines in modern wushu. So,
but that's because somebody deliberately made a form making it as imitative as possible, which is not really as representation of the general practice.
Dialing up the superficial resemblances to a Mantis. The majority of Mantis boxing is like elbows, knees, landing with the body, headbutting. You'll see the mantis. All the hooks are very temporary. They're like a transitional movement, or transitory or whatever. So basically, you're intercepting, touching, reefing in, and immediately striking. You never stop in a hook position unless you've like hit someone with a back hook in the side of the neck if you want to stare at them off the ground. But it's not really an imitative style. Although there are a lot of references in the manuscripts to the mantis, the creature, and the spirit of the mantis. Like this famous old poem, the mantis wants to stop the chariot. It's basically about this emperor or someone was basically heading down this road on a chariot, and there was a praying mantis in the middle of the road, like going fuck off and trying to stop the chariot. So it's a characteristic. It's used as a sort of an expression in China for someone who's like brave beyond their capacity. In other words, going to get crushed and run over, but doesn't care. Mantis boxing definitely has that bravery of the mantis, and in spirit there is like the idea of like the ferocity of the mantis, but definitely not an outward expression. It's not an imitative style. And yeah, I mean, there's mantis hooks that movements that are hooks, but you don't think you're a praying mantis while you're doing it, unless you're on mushrooms or something acid. But,
yeah, Will, do you want to add to that? Misconceptions, misunderstandings about mantis?
Honestly, I think that is really the big one, isn't it? That's pretty much it, that people think it's this imitation. And I guess that's old Hong Kong movies, and even like is it Street Fighter or Virtual Fighter? One that I can't remember had a guy that used to do this. So I think it's that
actor like with poking with the fingers.
Yeah. Oh, that's the other one. Yeah, the poking with the fingers. I remember seeing this National Geographic documentary where
catching flies.
They got this guy in a glass thing and see how many flies he can catch in a minute or something. Yeah.
Well, I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it with a story about the mantis standing in the middle of the road. It's not poking fingers. He was literally saying "fuck off." He was just doing it upside down.
Exactly.
So,
the wrong way. Yeah, I think it's Tang Lang bi dang che or something like that. It's like the man or Tang bi dang che or something. The mantis wants to stop. Ignore my tones. The mantis wants to stop the cart or the chariot. But yeah, it's well known. But yeah, the poking fingers is another one. There are a lot of pokes in the eye in mantis boxing. Let's not deny it. There's like literally, it's riddled with them. But majority of the pokes are straight or like this.
Yeah.
Or they're wipes. There are some movements where you call mantis like dots the eye or pierces the eye, where you do at the end of the movement, basically, you actually do poke here, or you can hit the balls like that. They're rare. They're like lowest percentage. The majority of the times it's a wipe with the fingers, or that's the most common version, the old twin dragons searching for the pearls type thing. Right. So yeah, so any video games where they're like on or old Hong Kong movies where some of them were cool, but some of them, oh man, terrible.
So that was a misrepresentation. All right.
Yep.
Anything else to add to that topic before we get into public questions?
I think that's the big misconception, really. I don't think there's much else.
I don't think it's salvageable at this point, particularly since even when you look at people that do competitive wushu, this is all they're trying to do, and
it's sort of seeped into like even a lot of traditional practitioners. The amount of times you see people doing like a legit, mantis form, and then they just throw in these like dropping right down into pubu and kind of rocking a bit instead of just the quick grab.
Yeah, well, it's very manly until they realize that mantis, after they copulate, the female eats the male. So maybe somebody should remind them of that.
Yeah, it's pretty devastating. I've actually gone and visited renowned masters, and they've like done a little bit in front of me, and then like for some stupid reason, maybe because I'm a foreigner, they actually added a little bit of like. Like, oh my god, and like they just didn't have to do that, and they're not known for that, and like you do actually see some traditional masters occasionally just chucking in a couple of little extra, or that fake fudge in where people will, like in Taiji all the time, punch in like a, it's like, oh Christ,
reverberation.
And I know there's a showmanship element when you do forms and you want to make it look good, but yeah, that stuff's got to stop.
Okay, let's get into the questions from the public. The first one was from Nassim Raufi, and he states, I am a former 7-star and 8-step Mantis practitioner. I would like to know your opinion on the following. Mantis systems somehow have wide field I'm sure he means a wide range of forms, such as Jia Yao 1 to 6, 3 to 5 Mei Hua, the big and small wheel, the Bai Yuan forms, and so on and so on. Now the question. Do you think it's necessary to learn them all, even if one is practicing in the end only 2 or 3? So is he saying you do have to practice them all and then know them all and just practice 2 or 3? Or do you think the 12 key are enough? Regards from Mother Germany.
The Heimat, is that it?
Do you want to go first?
Oh, yeah, righto. Like, I don't think it's necessary to learn them all unless you're like a transmitter or you've been given the burden or the responsibility to transmit the system. So unless you're the person who's in your country or wherever you are responsible for passing it on, which is kind of your responsibility if it's been passed to you, I don't think it is necessary to learn all the forms. There's too many, to be honest. So, I don't think the 12 keywords are enough on their own because they're kind of highly variable. The original, so the first set we see is kind of probably the most widely accepted, but even still there, they don't encompass everything of Mantis boxing. They're a cool, handy little snapshot of principles. But if you had that, you would then obviously need the bianhua, like the variation of each of those things, and not just like, oh, okay, gold means this. There's more to it than that. Their principles, their concepts are bigger than that. Then you need you need actual techniques to practice, and then you need like the solo drills and the paired drills, and then you need to have a methodology for then transmitting that to combat effectiveness. So I think practicing the 12 on their own is not enough as well, unless you're a highly advanced martial artist and magical. But I think if you
which everyone is today.
Yeah, I think if you had to ask me if I had to narrow it down, I would only practice the 6 JL, so the abstract, the summary, essentials forms. And if you said to me I only had to practice one at all, I would choose number 1 of the JL series. I think Lange is good too, or Lange is another name for it. But I prefer those kind of later forms because I think the footwork is a little bit more effective and flexible, and I like the body. As Mantis moved along a little bit, kind of got a little bit more. I think like the footwork is much more evolved, and the techniques. I like those kind of forms that like rush and overpower. So they're my personal favorites. I also like White Ape Steals the Peach and Mei Hua Lu because again they're those kind of rumbling, rolling, attacking forms. I like that kind of low, zigzagging, diving, seesawing action. But you don't even need to practice forms, to be honest. You're actually better off, in my opinion, to drill sort of solo techniques, key combinations, partner drills, sparring. So, but if you need to keep forms, they're the ones I would keep. And in answer to the first bit, you only really need to learn them all if you're going to be someone who transmit it, and you don't have to be that person. You can even practice one or no forms, but yeah, the older I get, the less I practice in terms of variation of things. Yeah.
Right. And Will?
Yeah, so I think that just talking about the 12 key words, I think a way to think of those is a bit more, it's sort of like the grammar, maybe is one way to think of it. Because they're kind of like, at least I know the 12 keywords in my lineage are different to Brendan's. So yeah, in my lineage, it's like Janni and Bangtie, the first 4. So like sticking, adhering, Bang, which means to put like both hands together so one hand helps the other. Tia is to paste, so it's like to stick your body to the opponent. So when you're looking at these keywords, they're not really enough by themselves because they're just a bit too abstract. So, if you think of them as kind of like a grammar, you also still need like your vocabulary, right? You still need like the techniques. And like Brendan said, I don't think you necessarily have to have forms. I think that really depends on like your training methodology. But, at least the way the system is constructed is through a series of forms. And then each form has certain principles and ideas like imbued within it. So I suppose which ones you have, if you don't want to have the whole system, if you're not, like Brendan said, charged with transmitting the whole system, I guess you just pick a couple that you like. So like within my style, it's kind of difficult to say. I think probably I would say the same as Brendan, and I would just like have the Jaya ones if I had to. But at the same time, for teaching, I really like Luanjie, because that's like, we call it the mother form. So it's supposedly like, you know, the original techniques of Taiji Mantis, like the 36 original techniques or the mother techniques that everything comes out of. And it's at least put together in a way that like it's quite short, but it gives people a lot that they can, you know, if you only teach them one form, they can like take it away and they can spend a long time pulling it apart and getting a lot of stuff out of it. So there's that one as well. But then I also like Bajo because, as I said before, about the power generation. So
yeah,
between any of those three, really.
Okay.
For different reasons.
All right, let's get on to the second one. This one came in through Patreon. AK Frank asks, in what way do you feel that the principles of your respective Mantis systems governs the behavior of movement and fighting? How would you describe the feeling around the final move? Best regards from a novice Baji practitioner who is always looking for the biggest bang. I hope he means fighting.
I'm for the big thing too. We all are. It's the ultimate aim. Look, I'll go first. Will give you time to... I think when it comes to fighting, the principles of both styles are essentially the same, as I've said about 50 times. But and the combat strategies definitely are the same. Mantis boxing doesn't really have the same kind of like emphasis on one hit, one kill type techniques like you have in Xi Liu He, or maybe even without generalizing Baji as well. There's a lot of like movements where it's like boom, and the expectation is that the opponent will be smashed and go down. That is in Mantis boxing, but Mantis boxing is combination heavy, and so everything is thrown in a series basically. When there are like single big heavy shots, they're normally at the end of a combination, and you throw all the strikes in a combination, like you have the potential to be able to turn each of them into a KO strike if you can, because the idea is to throw every shot so that if the hole is there, you go through and you hit. So you throw empty, but you've always got to be able to turn it into full. So that's that empty and empty. Or you throw heavy things to elicit a response so you can go soft and then switch to the other side. So combination, switching left and right. But when it's the heavy shots, most of those final sort of like, what you call showstoppers or whatever at the end of a combo. And in Mantis boxing, they're normally like, so you hit all these things and then you end up right here against the person and putting him in a compromised position, and these like showstoppers are kind of the movements where you'll dump someone heavily over the leg or push or pull them across himself into things like called as twisting the skeleton, and then like heavily make them fall head first, face first onto the ground. So or there might be an elbow or a knee contributing to that. So it's kind of like long range, get in, tangle, hit, bang, over. Okay. So you and there's not really any. There are some, like for example, there's the 8 fatal and 8 non-fatal and 8 fatal. But when you look at those fatal techniques, to be honest, with modern thinking, they're mostly bullshit. They're not fatal at all. You know, talking about like hitting somebody on the, you know, like the tail part of the spine. It's like they're not fatal. Even like the, you know, like the famous, you know, hitting people on the nape of the neck. They're not fatal. Most of these techniques, you're not going to kill somebody, and it's, you know, but there's a couple in there which are kind of like fatalities. So like. You know, removing the helmet. So these like this kind of moves where you like put the neck back over, but you know, it's actually really hard to break someone's neck. I've tried many times.
Yeah, no, it's not easy.
And things like a golden rooster seizes the crop. These kind of like movements where you smash in and go behind the trachea. So there's a strike and then a squeeze like in here. So there's those kind of things. Again, they're not fatal unless you really lay it in hard against someone who's unsuspecting, but they're kind of our showstoppers. So
should they change the name to possibly fatal?
Possibly fatal, yeah. Well, there's the 8 non-fatal and the 8 fatal. It should be the 8 non-fatal and the 8 slightly more fatal, but not fully fatal. But, you know, like a lot of those things are also about, like, you hit this point here, or whatever it is, at a certain time of the day, and it's like, oh, they're gone. You know, like if I sneak into your room while you're asleep and I, like, do this in a certain part under your foot, like, oh, you
well, they fixed that in a Windows 98 update, so that doesn't work anymore. So.
Well, I stopped updating probably back around then, so yeah.
That's so common though, this thing. Like, yeah, hit here at a certain time and...
Yeah.
You know.
Temples. Yeah. Sides of the ribs here, base of the spine, top of the neck, armpits,
It's like, well, they'll really annoy the person, but you're not going to kill them. But there's a lot of like, Will saying, his family don't use much of that, or they do in Qingdao. Will, I don't know why, but like we use a lot of that, like elephant nose punch, the chicken heart punch, or whatever.
Yeah, really use this one.
Yeah, so a lot of our striking is into all the soft body cavities is with that. So a lot and
specific targets. Yeah.
Yeah. So like opening punch of the first one of JL for you guys it's a flat fist, right? Will, for us it's definitely like that, and it's like anywhere from there down. So side of the throat. When we're hitting into soft body cavities, we're using this single knuckle a lot. Under the armpits, under here, floaters. So yeah, there's that kind of stuff. But yeah, to me, not much of it is fatal. But they're your showstoppers anyway. Get in, engage, tangle them up, hard slams to the floor. And then what's left out of the forms often is them just stomping on their head or jamming a spear in their face, which is really what it's for. So.
Or some other concealed weapon, which was exactly why you don't go to the floor back then, because you will get stabbed.
Well, all of these, mantis boxing is a caravan or bodyguarding style. It was the era when it came out. It was the foundation era and was known in those scenes, and they were all bodyguards, caravan guards. They all carried a spear, carried a dole or a short sword, a flexible whip around the waist, a flexible blade, flying darts in the sleeve, a man catching fork. They were just armed to the teeth. And
3 hand grenades and a tank. They drove a tank.
Big missiles, all there.
C4.
Yeah.
Just saying about the ground fighting, like nothing on the ground. There is, and especially in not part of Taiji Mantis per se, but a lot of Taiji Mantis people also did Shuikoman, which is like a ground, call it Ditang Tran, like ground tumbling style.
Digong in Shandong.
Yeah, but it's not like ground in the way that like jiu-jitsu is. It's more like...
I knew Will was going to talk about jiu-jitsu.
We're 1 hour in and he's been waiting that long. He's been pretty patient. So
yeah.
Maybe I'll do this. I'll drink every time you say jiu-jitsu. So it's a cheers, Will.
Pass me one. Yeah, sorry, Will.
Man, I forgot what I was saying now.
Yeah, it's ground fighting.
Shuikoman, yes. I mean, like, there is this kind of ground stuff, but it's more like if you've fallen down, how to get back up, or if you can't get back up, how to fight someone who's standing up, or like, it's a different concept to like grappling.
It's they have Kandi Basami, but they have the scissor takedown, multiple variations, and kick off. You know what it's like.
If you're not learning a tactical or technical stand up on your first day in jiu-jitsu, you got to change school. So it's the similar idea. Fall down, get the hell back up.
Yeah. The founder of Seven Star also practiced a ground fighting style, Earth Dragon style, or whatever. So it seems to be in common that at the origins of mantis boxing, they were practicing these ground fighting styles in Shandong. So they're regional styles that were pretty popular then. So you actually see a lot of it in Will's style, probably more so than you see in ours. They've got this 7th JL, which is actually entirely a ground form. We don't have it.
It's just, I guess it's just the other big thing, like in the Shandong Peninsula, you've got Mantis, you've got Long Fist, and you've got ground boxing.
Do you think it's because from time immemorial the people in Shandong used to drink a lot? So somebody because that's my experience.
Yeah.
All right,
let's get references to drunken stuff, like in Mantis a little bit. Like there's one poem we have in Taiji Mantis about the steppes being like a drunkard. So
right. Okay, I'll go into the next question. It is from Andrew Oliver. He says, okay, here's a question for Brendan and Will. Knowing what you know now, if you were to start over, what would you do differently? Or what piece of advice would you give starting out in Mantis with that in mind?
I will.
Whoever goes first.
I think I would have told myself, go and do like a couple of years jiu-jitsu. Of like Sanda or Muay Thai or something.
Say jiu-jitsu, I need another sip here.
I said
go and do jiu-jitsu. Yeah. No, I just say like I would, rather than kind of doing it the other way around, because I began like very traditional with basics and forms and everything. I would say just like do it the other way around and just do something like kickboxing or you know, anything that's just like a lot of like pad work and sparring stuff, just to kind of get that foundation first.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, so that you already know how to fight before you go into like learning, because traditional arts are very
better.
good and meticulous. Yeah.
I mean, Will went there when he was like 17, and stayed for like 12 years. I mean, so you didn't get the chance to do that, really, did you? Anyway, I mean, at that such a young age.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off. Or
No, that was pretty much what I would say to
Yeah.
myself. I could, yeah.
And yourself?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty difficult question, but I think I probably wouldn't have been so closed-minded. I was very like fixated on just going there and just studying 7-star, and just from my family and only under my teacher. And I had a lot of offers to like train under other great masters, and like even people asked me to curtail to them, you know, to become the disciple. And I was like, no, thanks, I don't need that shit. And like, you know, in the end, my teacher was like, what's wrong with you? And he worked out a way to do it, was that he'd bring teachers, guest coaches in to coach me, teachers to teach me. So I'd learn from these people anyway, but I wouldn't have to become their student. And I was so proud of my family, and I refused to learn anything else. So I was very blinkered. And I think also, I really pushed back. I had this idea that like weapons training, you know, save that up until you finished all your bare hand training. And I did do weapons. I started doing weapons here when I was quite young, but I had this like idea in my head that you had to master bare hand first to be able to do weapons properly. And so they kept saying like, you know, you got to study this spear, you got to study, you know, dado, you got to study this form of sword. I was like, oh no thanks, I'll be right, let me just study on bare hand. And because I was fighting a lot, I just was interested in bare hand, so I ended up studying a lot of the same stuff. I did a lot of different versions, and I did learn like fundamentals of stick and spear, and like, but it took me a long time because I was so resistant to it. And my teachers would say, don't be stupid, you need to start this stuff earlier because it's going to enhance your skills across the board. And I kind of was too stubborn. And for example, my teacher was really good in the 6 harmony stick, and I never actually learned it off him because he died before I let him teach it to me, because I was too busy trying to master the bare hand stuff. And I learned fundamentals, and I had a chance to learn from other people, but I didn't learn it from my teacher, and that was one of his key things. And they were always saying, you got to learn his Liu He Gun. And I was like, yeah, soon. So that's a kind of a regret. I also didn't care about theory or manuscripts for a very long time, and I remember in '97 being shown like one of the oldest like actual copies of these like Qing Dynasty Tremple, and I basically looked at it like, oh yeah, and then just walked off. You know, like I just didn't care. I didn't give a shit. I only cared about fighting, and like if it was theory, it had to make sense to me strategically from a fighting perspective. And like my teacher would say, you need to go and see so and so because you got to get Tremple from here. I'm like, what for? If you give it to me, I'll have it, but like I don't care. I don't need to go see this guy, or I'd have to go train with this guy so that I would get his Tremple. And because like they were divided amongst the seniors in our family as well. X had X amount of copies, and so like I'd go and train with this person and get some from him, go from there. My teacher only had limited amounts, and then you consolidate them. But I just wasn't interested in that stuff. And they used to say to me like, you need it. You need to have the theoretical base. You need to have the deeper knowledge and understanding, especially if you're going to transmit it. I still think you don't need to have as much as some people think that they need, because I think for me it's all about actually the doing. I prefer to train. I don't even I'm talking a lot now because I'm kind of just like rambling nervously because I'm a rabbit in the headlights because I'm uncomfortable, but I actually don't like talking about this shit. I just like training, and I just like doing, and I like feeling. I like to be hit, thrown, smashed, to be shown something. I need to be attacked with it. I need to feel it. I don't I started as I get older to get more into theory and get a bit of a deeper understanding, but I still, for me, it's physical understanding. And I think I also kind of like, I'm going on too long, but I think I also kind of resisted cross-training for too long. I did a lot of styles before I started Mantis boxing, but once I started Mantis boxing, I was really reluctant to cross-train at all. And so I was kind of limited to what I could compete in terms of combat sports, only Chinese rule sets, which is stupid. So Sanda, and it was really poor opportunities at that time. So what happened with me is I kind of missed the MMA boat, and I would really, if I had my time back again, have liked to have cross-trained and in grappling, so that, I mean, I started with grappling. Jiu-jitsu.
Jesus will.
No, not jiu-jitsu. I would have done just straight up MMA, so I would have done the grappling, the MMA specific grappling, because I love MMA. A lot of traditional martial arts people don't, but I do. And
there's no contradiction with loving MMA and doing traditional martial arts.
But some people think there is. Some people think it's fucking heretical. But so I missed the boat there because I was only competing in like modified Sanda, a little bit of modified Thai. But in my peak years, I was busy doing shit that I could have best used. I mean, I don't regret any of the training I did, but I think I would have liked to have cross-trained at the same time while I had the energy, the youth, and was healthy enough, because I would like to have at least made some inroads in competing in MMA in the earlier days. It was very new in Australia then, though, and I missed the boat. I'm way too old now. But and I also would have taken a much smarter approach to rehabilitation of injuries. I got lots of
that's one of my regrets too.
Yeah. And I think the advantage that I have that Will didn't have is that I wasn't stuck in China. So I'd go to China for 6 months and I'd come home, or I'd go for 3 months, or I'd go for 2 months, 6 weeks, and I'd absorb as much as I could, and I'd take it home to clean, beautiful Australia, and I'd eat healthily, better nutrition, clean air, proper rehabilitative physiotherapy, modern Western sports science approach. I was able to take what I learned over there, apply it here, in a safe and sort of kind of modern context, and I think I benefited a lot from that, so I don't regret that. I think that was a good thing, but which is not what we've been asked, but there you go.
Well, I mean, it's actually relevant because it's one of the problems living here. Like I've been going through it for the last 8 months. Is if you have some injury, it sometimes gets completely overlooked, and sometimes you'll never get the correct treatment for it. So. That's just how it is. So that's what you were alluding to. Okay, I'll go on to the next question. It's from Trevor Taylor. He says, why does there seem to be a difference in the way people who practice praying mantis from Hong Kong move compared to their mainland counterparts?
I think this is Brendan's one, so it's more of a 7.
Just let me know. I'm gonna ask if I'm correct, and then you can answer. Is it because of the dim sum?
It is. It's yum cha on the whole. It's changed everything.
It's changed everything. Okay.
And it's the temperature. Look, it's not only a difference in the way that Hong Kong and China moves. It's actually a difference in the way that China and Taiwan moves. Hong Kong and Taiwan and Southeast Asia and China. So they're all different. So we do have regional variation, and then inside that we've also got. There's differences between the way different lineages in the same family move. So the reason why it's such an obvious difference between Hong Kong and China is because we're mainly really talking about Hong Kong 7-star. And one of the features in like characteristic or flavor development in families is that it's often modeled on a key figure. And so, for example, all these people that are descended from Wang Xiaohua, who was like a very big figure who basically took Mantis boxing to the world, the people that are descended from him, even today, are only within 2 generations of his life. And so basically, their movements are modeled on people who basically modeled their movements on him directly. So you can actually see we're not that many far generations from him, and you've got one kind of unified massive family, even though there's some variants in there too. There's a couple of streams within that particular lineage, but they all kind of move in a very similar way to each other because they're basically within only a couple of generations of him. So therefore you have to assume that at least some part of that is a result of them emulating his movements. Now on top of that, you've also got other factors when you're in regional variations can be influenced by styles in the area. So for example, in Shandong, there's definitely bigger influence of Chinese wrestling and other styles. And so you see emphasis in Shandong Mantis is often on takedowns and throws. And so also you see the visible difference in the way that they perform their forms in Hong Kong versus Shandong is also got to do with the way that the emphasis in applications. And so, for example, in Hong Kong, you see these like lightning fast, rapid hand combinations, really sharp and quick. And the cadence is different. It's like machine gun, like all the way through. They're lightning fast. Their focus is on speed. And so their stances and their body method has to be different to facilitate that. If the rhythms are different in Shandong because often the emphasis is on seizing and throwing. And so the rhythms are broken up differently. But not only that, you're often ending in a much deeper stance. And you're also doing bigger sort of like flexion of the torso, huge big long range motions, which means you actually can't move your body like that when you're moving like machine gun, rapid, fast, the way that these Hong Kong 7-star people are. Their emphasis is mainly on striking. They have the same takedowns as well, but they have a higher stance, and they have like faster, shorter strikes, different rhythms, and so it's 10 times faster. When you watch them do a form and you watch the mainland equivalent of 7-star, the 7-star version from the mainland is much slower. It's punctuated with more pauses, deeper stances, and much more sort of lurching and deeper sort of like fast stepping footwork. So you got differences in application, which results in a different way to play things. So that's one aspect too. And then you also got like like they had the influence of like Eagle Claw on them in Shanghai as well. So and then there's the elephant in the room, which is the influence of modern wushu on anything that comes out of China. And then there's the elephant a little bit further back in the room, which is the influence of like the Jingwu Association and the Washuguan system on Hong Kong and also Taiwanese martial arts. So there's all these competing influences, regional variations, the flavors that prominent figures had that are inherited by their descendants. They all contribute to a different look and a different feel. But when I was younger, I used to think one was more correct than the other. But I think now actually the one that you do in your family is definitely more appropriate for you, and that's the correct one. There's no one correct way to do it. Each family has its own characteristics for a reason, and that's why things look different. That's part of it. There's more to it than that. That's oversimplifying. Shandong people say they're bigger. The southern people are smaller. That's kind of a little bit more of a sort of general throw out there. I think there's way more factors. There's also the influence of a lot of the southern masters having learned other styles like Bak Mei and things like that. And also in Shandong, a lot of the masters learned things like Sun Bin Chuan or Cha Chuan or whatever. So there's cross-pollination everywhere, regional variation everywhere. Each city's different, and even in the city, in one style, you get different generations. My teacher moved completely different from the next half generation down from him, born 10 years later, and then the people 10 years later moved differently again. The people one generation or like 10 to 20 years before my teacher moved different again. And so each teacher in different stage of their life also moves in a different way. So his later generation disciples often pick up the movement, the body characteristics, and they also, like, for example, Lin Jingshan, who's like a key figure in our lineage, when he got older, he changed some of the stances. He modified the 7-star stance, created this one, which is a little bit more like halfway between a 7-star stance and a Bamabu, which is basically with a deep bent leg. It was an innovation that he invented later in his life. He also started to prefer more China. It was easy for him to teach when he's older. So things like that contribute to it too.
Yeah,
so
makes a difference.
It's not a simple answer. It's very complex, but they're different for a reason.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Will, do you have anything to add to that?
Just to expand a little bit, I think also you can just look at the, like China as being such a big place, and including the Chinese diaspora and across Southeast Asia as well. Like, you can think of each region as like its own country almost. I mean, Shandong versus Guangdong is as different as like Germany and Spain. So it's only natural that when something migrates, when an art migrates to different places, the people in that place, their personality, their character,
and the environment,
the customs and the environment, the customs, like all this, the lifestyle, all these little things are going to have an impact on the way it's approached. And it's a lot like, if you think like how it come, Mantis, like say now, like we're here in Australia, and whether we like it or not, we're going to be changing how we're doing it because, we're white people teaching it to,
kangaroos.
Westerners.
Yeah.
Like, we're not Shandong people. Like, our personality is different. So the way we think about it's going to be different. And, I think Hong Kong, is a very, very different place to Shandong. So it's only natural that things will change. And also, just one other little thing is in Hong Kong, space is very limited. So, like, in Shandong, you tend to practice a lot outdoors. You have a lot of sort of open space. Whereas in Hong Kong, they rent, like a space above a restaurant or, some kind, they have like physical schools, which are quite small. And I suppose they would have, I'm just assuming here, but they would have had to like adjust how they're practicing to deal with like teaching in these smaller spaces, right?
Right, yeah. That makes a difference. And, you said something interesting, Brendan, like everybody's emulating one teacher. That's the main line. And I remember there was a guy that I knew here in Beijing that did Xingyi with another older Xingyi, he's passed on since, but older Xingyi practitioner who had a hip problem.
Yeah, right.
He had this hip problem his whole life. And when I looked at his students, they all emulated the same posture and the same problem, actually, in the way they moved, and they weren't doing it because they had hip problems, but this does affect, and people don't know this, but it's completely relevant.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, the idea is that you're meant to emulate your teacher as closely as you can in the formative years, but then as you get to a higher level, you are
develop your own.
Supposed to own it and develop your own, but some people never get out of that. But for some people, it's also orthodoxy. They practice it that way because that's the way that it was meant to be practiced, and that's fair enough too.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get on to the next question. From Andrew Miles, and he's got a triple-barreled question. So, here we go. What problems did Mantis evolve to solve that weren't in the martial arts landscape before? Was it solving problems which were previously unsolved, or simply offering a more efficient path for doing so?
You go, Will. Andy's come out with some hard ones. Andy's a deep thinker too, and he's been around for a long time. So he's practiced Mantis boxing for decades as well. So you go, Will.
I don't know if it's specifically to if it's to deal with a specific problem, but I think it's like we said back at the beginning. I think it's more just a case of that was just the natural way that the evolution of martial arts in the area went. It's kind of the trend that's what people were doing, and that's what was around, and people sort of emulated the way they saw other good fighters behaving or moving, and fighting. So I don't think there was a specific problem in mind, people are doing this technique, so we have to develop these ideas to overcome it. I don't think there was really something like that, but I mean, going back to the early days, it is all just speculation, really.
Anything to add?
Look, you got anything to add, Will?
Nah, I think that's it.
Look,
Really.
I don't think it. I think each style came at the same problem from different angles, and I think, to be objective, I don't know whether or not Mantis boxing arrived at it or did it more efficiently or effectively than any other style. But it was definitely effective enough to survive that sort of kind of hotbed environment, the caravan guarding, Yantai, the Dongbei region, the warlord era, the collapse of the Qing. So it was there at the time when violence was an everyday thing. So apparently it was good enough to deal with that. So it was an effective style at that time, and there were a few, and things like Baji have a reputation for that as well. This is only a local one in Shandong, but actually there were a lot of these guys who actually worked as far as Beijing and went down to Fujian and up all over Dongbei, so actually it was more than Shandong. But I think it was one of the first styles to kind of, in my understanding, incorporate a high percentage of head strikes and head body combos. So a lot of the older styles like to focus on the body as a target area because, of the traditional Chinese thinking that the destructive techniques are going to attack, the body and the body cavity. So Mantis boxing has is a head hunting art, a lot of combos. I mean, I'm not saying it's exclusive to Mantis boxing. I can, in your style as well. But Mantis boxing is definitely combo heavy and has that more kind of boxing-ish feel. And I think that maybe later iterations of Mantis boxing maybe were moving towards dealing with styles that it hadn't before. Maybe there was even some influence later on of Western boxing, because that was the first head hunting style that came into China and made a big impact because of the targeting of the head. Head's always been targeted, but in later styles, the targeting of the head seemed to increase a lot, and Mantis boxing was one of those. There was one style, Will, that Mantis boxing did actually have a lot of interactions with, and that is Bagua in Shandong, a lot of fights. And so maybe some of the techniques in that area and Republic era were, honed to go against Bagua. That's what the folklore says, with one of our enemy styles. So, yeah.
And here we are talking to each other.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think it was what's the style up there, like the Yin Fu or whatever.
It's
Mine's derived from Yin.
Yeah, Kung Bao Tian. So yeah, there was some like even like some trouble between him and one of the main characters out of Will's family. So yeah, that was definitely a rival style. So some of the techniques I've been told to me, this is for defeating Baghuas, blah and blah. So I don't know whether that's bullshit or not, but they were definitely having interactions. So yeah, and they were fighting everyone. They were fighting everybody. Everyone was fighting everyone at that time. Everyone was kung fu fighting. Yeah, more likely stabbing each other, but yeah, a lot of stabbing to death actually, a lot of killings, a lot of the progenitor of Will Style had one eye missing. I think he was rammed in the eye with a spear, and yeah, everyone had half their jaw hanging off.
But Chinese martial arts is about peace, harmony, culture.
Yeah. Except our styles. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. There was cross. I just add about the Bagua thing. There is quite a bit of cross-pollination with Tongbei and even like the modern Tongbei. I think a lot of these sort of whipping hand stuff, and that sort of made its way into Mantis. And I think that the Bagua, like not the full circle walking, but some of the footwork concepts of like moving around, I think has made its way into some of the later forms in Mantis.
Downs and throws too. I think we've probably ripped off a few from there.
Yeah.
I think the Shandong Bagua is more linear though.
If it's Yin Fu derived, it's not going to be Chen Tinghua throw heavy. Yeah, it's derived.
Yeah. So. But even our say for example our shutting palms in some of our family, it's like laying like that. It's not even it's like actually
like ox tongue palms in Yin style.
Yeah, that's right. And maybe that's some cross pollination there too. So in some families of ours, you see it more predominantly. In my family, it's definitely like that. So yeah.
Okay, let's get on to Andrew's second of his trilogy. If you remove the hooking hands, which theories of combat differentiate Mantis from Long Fist?
All right, I'll go then. Since Will was about to speak, I'll cut him off. I don't really think actually that the hooking hand is the distinguishing characteristic of Mantis boxing, but I don't really think that's what... Well, I mean, like, for example, the hooking hand and its uses in, like, lots of forms of Chang Chuan, like Arlang Chuan, Mizong Chuan, these kind of things. And the theory and the use is similar, maybe not as highly developed, but I get what he means. If you take that out, what are the distinguishing characteristics? So, I have got some notes here because I did translate something from here too. So this part's not translated, but basically according, as we said, from the early manuscripts, Mantis boxing is really short boxing, duanda at its core. And so it's really about close range fighting. Even though you might start at a long distance range, it's about what happens when you get in close. And close range is the specialty. So in particular, it's the use of the short range weapons like the elbow, the knee, the head, shoulder, the hip, the buttocks, even the chin and the mouth. So biting as well. So knocking and ramming, takedowns. So like, this he talked to before, that guy there talked about like in our family it's Jianyan Tiekol. So it's like to contact, stick, follow, press, and call to bump. So like these kind of knockdown throws where you slam with your body. So the torso, the shoulder, the hip, the knee, this bang, these kind of takedowns. That's what most of them are. So takedowns and trips to the goal. So at least some of the combat theory, which is the only, as I said before, the only stuff I'm really interested in, is about like distance management. And so a very simplified way of expressing that in our family, we've got a thing which is called like the 4 striking distances. And again, this is fairly generic combat theory, but it helps like explain the principles in fighting, distinguishing characteristics when you take out, say, the hook. And that's like 1 is the long distance, and at long distance you're kicking and dodging. And then 2 is the medium distance, so punching and palm striking. So that includes your sort of chopping, threading and piercing, and also blocking. And the 3rd distance is the short distance. So the short distance, you're using like the elbow, the knee, pushing and pulling, so destabilizing. And at the 4th distance, it's the body-to-body or body contact range. So you've gone from out here, you've gone boom, and now you're there, okay? And you're stuck to them. And that's where you use head, shoulder, hips, buttock, chin, or biting. So you're right up on them, you've bound them up, and basically you then like headbutt, knee, elbow, crack, destabilize. And then the one that I add the extra range after that is stomping on the head or sock kicking them in the head when they're on the ground. But you also can use Fansha and Lulu, so these like big circling movements. They're either coming in like alternating, rotating vertical or angular circles over the top, or they're like rotating and coming up from underneath. So you can use them as a bridge between the medium to short range. And then also we use at that short range Chin-Na, of course. So that's the other thing. So at the contact range, short to contact range, as soon as the limb touches, if you can destabilize and use Chin-Na as well as part of the destabilization to pull them off balance, or at the end of the destabilization to seize and immobilize. So you don't have to always like end in terminating the throw, but you can end in a seizing, so stopping somebody. So there's a lot of like double and single binding, and there's a lot of emphasis on on crossing limbs over, locking things up, pulling down, and like fastening, we call it. So that's their characteristics. But, you know, as I said, to be honest, not all that stuff is exclusive to Mantis boxing, and you can find some of that in the combat strategy and theory of other styles, and even in some of the long fist styles. But to me, they're the kind of key things that distinguish it, at least in terms of combat. And I think Andy's interested in combat. And yeah, I don't know. I think none of that was really about hooks, so they're things that, aside from hooks, distinguish the ideas of engagement in Mantis boxing and what the key goals are.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
I would say though, I just want to contradict you a bit. I think personally that quite a bit of that I would personally like classify under hooks, like especially
there's a hooking element,
because like a lot of the Chin-Na is sort of really like, you know, classify it is, you know, moving in and out of hooks, and a lot of the where the hooking really takes place is like the trapping, you know, a lot of the trapping and pinning and pulling the arms. So it's that sort of intermediary level between like a stage between like the more long distance, like extended arm striking and the close in clinching, grappling sort of stuff.
So to me, the use of the hook is more to bridge that distance from the medium to short range. So like deflective hooks. There are hooks where you seize, which is what we was talking about, which can transition into Na or whatever, but they're only like part of that. They're like that split instant where you touch and then it turns into a seize. So you don't need the hook to do that. You can grab with a straight wrist like this. You can chop and smash without it. So I talked about all the things where you can extract the hook and the other characteristics, but you're correct. There's hooks all through that, I think is what you're trying to say. Every one of those except the long distance, because you're not going to use a hook at long distance. You're an idiot if you reach for a hook off a long punch, which is not even in your range, just as you are if you try to reach out to do a block on a kick when you're at kicking range. You're going to get kicked or punched straight in the head. Like you don't reach for strikes. So the hooks are more incidental and they're transitional parts of those things. And in my family at least, it's used. I hate to say bridge because bridge is really a southern boxing term, but it is quite appropriate in English. They're a bridge between the distances. But yes, Will's right. Those hooks can also be a part of Chin-Na.
Okay.
Because I think sometimes, I just add real quick, just because I guess what I'm trying to say is, I feel like often in the forms, the hook shape is exaggerated a bit, whereas in application, it might just be more like a grab or a clasp or something. It's not necessarily going to be like a full, you know, nice classical Mantis hook.
Yeah, but how would you then poke people in the eye if you just...
That's the whole reason.
That you got to poke them in the eye.
Well, the reason why I won't crap on too much, but the reason why it ends up back there in that position, and some people do it like that, some people do it like that, whatever. That's the very extreme end of the movement. The movement's occurring here. It's like that long fist approach too. You punch with full extension all the way out there. You can't see my fist, but it's about 3 meters away. But the impact is here. Okay, so the reason why in long fist you do full extension is because you're training the power to punch through. So even though your fist ends all the way out here, the strike actually occurs here. It's the same with the hooks. The hooks are basically more likely like that. They're coming like that. They're ending up like that.
When there's actually a wrist there that you grab on, it's not going to end up, you know, like in a full hook like this. It's more just getting it from the little finger like this side.
But there's soft hook and there's heavy hook. There's empty hook and solid hook. There's lots of different kinds. And there's a lot of back hooks too. So...
And then there's Captain Hook.
Captain Hook. There's old band in Australia called Sky Hooks. Yeah, there's hookers just around here on the main road, like someone told. But yeah, there's so many. There are a lot of hooks in Mantis boxing, so I now contradicted everything I've said, and I haven't answered Andy's question at all. There's nothing.
No, you guys have.
The hooks out. It's just an empty shell.
Okay. Part 3 of this trilogy. Which weapon was Mantis originally associated with?
Go on, Will.
C4, right?
Jiu-jitsu.
The ground. Will's now a shark because the floor is his ocean. In the old days, the enemy was a cicada, and the leaf was his ocean or something. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. All of 6 weeks of jiu-jitsu. But I think at least looking at the early writings, it's staff and spear. Looking at Liang Shuishang, his first manual was called Guanqiang Quanpu. So the manual of fists, staff, and spear. So I would say that's probably it, really. I mean, it's kind of funny because like the double-handed sword has become the most like characteristic, but that's actually like a really recent, like sort of early 20th century warlord era
creation.
It's not a part of Old Mantis at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of an overgeneralization, but you can kind of say that the majority of the northern and central eastern styles of China are based on the spear, and you can see remnants of it in the footwork, in the body method. So, I mean, Liu He Tang Lang is definitely in their tradition based on the spear. A lot of these He-based styles, they're based on the spear. And some people say, like, oh, you know, how common was it to carry a spear around? What was damn common? In fact, the spear was one of the key weapons, apart from the short sword or the saber. So I think it is also based on that too. However, a lot of the movements, there's a lot of cleaving and chopping in Mantis boxing, and there's a lot of reference to that in the old manuscripts as well. And the actions are very similar to the actions of the Dao. So you're hacking, chopping, cleaving, a lot of vertical, circular motions, which do translate quite well to the use of the Dao. And the Dao was also like a primary weapon of these people too. However, and it was also referenced in the Trempo as well to the Tanglang hook or the Tanglang hand being Tanglang Dao. So they're calling this the Mantis blade, Mantis knife. But that's actually a literal reference to the Mantis hooks, because that's actually an old nickname for even the Mantis itself. So so they refer to that as like a blade. But so some of the movements, or even like double sealing or those hooking hands, are sometimes written in certain Trempo as like Tanglang, Chuang Dao or whatever, like double Mantis Dao. And so you can see there's references to Dao, but I think that's more literally to the Mantis hook. But there are definitely a lot of cleaving, chopping, circular actions, and a lot of the defensive motions definitely are reminiscent of the use of the Dao, but still say it's built on the spear. And once you learn the kind of 3 key weapons, I say 3 because spear and stick is kind of interchangeable in Mantis boxing, because our stick is very similar to a spear, and it's very similar techniques. You technically should be able to grab any weapon and wield it in the way with the same kind of like rhythms, principles, as a Mantis boxer. So put a machete in your hand, cricket bat, whatever you want. It's same kind of principles.
Beer bottle.
Emotions. Beer bottle for sure. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's the Australian version. Yeah.
and just talking about the spear then, and also just thought it just made me think of something going back to talking about the body movement. This is also one of the the things with like the way that we coil the body so much, because it's kind of like if you hold like a very heavy spear, it's quite difficult to generate power like just using your limbs alone, right? But you pin the spear onto your body, and then you use like your belly specifically, to move the spear. And that's kind of the idea of like the way we're moving as well. So that helps to to like align both arms up, so your arms are moving in coordination via the body.
So that's what I was talking about. There's traces of it still in our footwork and in our body methods.
Interesting. Okay, so next question. Ole Korf asks, would you recognize a Mantis practitioner defending themselves more by their body mechanics, open, closed, dantian, or by their mentality and tactics?
I think I might recognize it more from like some key movements or maybe some. Oh, that guy's a Mantis boxer because they might use a certain kind of specific rhythm or whatever. But to be honest, in real fighting looks like fighting. And in real fighting under duress, most of the movements are gross motor movements. So the movements that you are going to see are the movements that are the kind of moves that people will say, that's kickboxing, because that's fighting. It's punching and kicking. And, elbows and knees when you're in close enough. So I don't think I would have the ability to detect any usage one way or another with Dantian, but I think that's more of an issue for training, and for visualization and correct body mechanics. But in the fight, in brawl, yeah, I wouldn't be able to pick that up myself. Mantis boxing, they might use a few key techniques. I'll go, I know what that is. But I think that's going to be more just the outwardly obvious things. And yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the techniques you see, you might not even be able to distinguish from Muay Thai if you see it in effect in a real fight. To be honest, yeah.
Okay. Will?
I think there's a few things that might be a bit of a giveaway in some of the angles of attack.
Yeah,
are a little bit different to more like conventional kickboxing sparring type thing. Like there's more like the sort of striking downwards or outwards. A lot of hammer fist type things. And also, I think one of the things you'd see is a bit like the rhythm in the way that they're using the combinations and then ending combinations with that kick, that groin kick. Because that's something I think you don't really see other styles using so much. Like quite often you tend to see kicks being like more like the entry, but we tend to use the kicks like at the end of a combination.
Door shutting.
Yeah.
It's literally what its name is. So yeah, I mean,
the door shutting kick. So I think that's one thing that would definitely be like a big giveaway. If someone comes in with a lot of strikes and then kicks like at the end. And then sort of move, to end the combo.
And then if he does this at the end too, right?
Yeah. It pokes him in the eye.
It pokes right in the eye.
Yeah, but
any one of the three.
Look, I've been around Mantis boxing fucking long time, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody actually do that in a fight. The finish with the Yuan Yang Zhou or a door shutting kick and back up. I mean, in theory, yeah, but in reality, I was told you when we spoke last time, I was lucky enough to see my own teacher fight, and when he fought, he brawled. So, he used a nice, collapsing elbow, like a folding elbow, and there was a couple of, recognizable techniques in there, but it was a fight. There's adrenaline. There's people trying to smash each other's faces in. Real fights look like real fights. I'm not a big fan of this. Oh, it needs to look like the style. I think that's utter bullshit.
You just need to make a format. If you're doing competitive fighting, you just need a format that it allows people to do as much as they can safely.
MMA.
Really?
Just a one fucking solution. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all.
Oh,
Jesus.
Yeah, have another drink. Yeah, I got a lot of Muay Thai friends, and they think that people who do jiu-jitsu are pussies because they only do jiu-jitsu because they don't like getting punched in the head and kicked in the head.
Why they like getting punched? Do your Thai boxing friends?
I do jiu-jitsu, so I can't. I'm not. I'm just laughing at it. I think it's funny. It's kind of true, but.
All right, we'll go on to the last triple-barreled question from Vince MC. Number 1, could you compare and contrast the strategy and tactics of the different Mantis systems? I think we kind of covered some of this.
We kind of covered that one.
Yeah, we have.
All right, so then let's go on to the next one. Compare and contrast strategy and tactics of Mantis versus other major Chinese martial arts. I think we've done this quite a lot through this discussion.
I think that's a bit more in line with what I was saying then, like the more idealistic way of when you see someone fighting with Mantis, how you think it would be, the points that I just made before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's about distance control, entry, strike, control, grapple, subdue, and or throwing. So limb contact and simultaneous leg attack is a characteristic. It's definitely a specialty. And then elbows and forearm strikes. That's the key strategy in Mantis, kind of recapping all the crap that I said earlier. That's what it kind of is. And yeah.
Okay. Part 3 of his question was, could you discuss the history and benefits of the 18 Lohan Qigong? Now, we have somewhat discussed this. You're not practicing so much. You said you found similar, better benefits or similar benefits in other ways.
Yeah.
Will, do you practice it often?
No, like I say, we don't have the 18 Lohan in
Oh, you
Taiji.
don't. That's right. Sorry. My
Like
bad.
I have teachers who really cared about it, and others who just absolutely thought it was rubbish. One of my teachers in particular, his teacher hated Qigong, and in fact, when a famous troop came from Beijing in the 1950s to Qingdao, there was a guy who was smashing things on his throat with a sledgehammer, this, that, and the other. My teacher's teacher challenged him and basically flogged him in front of a whole lot of people, and he made the papers, and he basically said Qigong is bullshit in his article. And so one of my teachers kind of inherited that. You know, I'm not putting it down. As I said before, I think we can say for sure that Lohan Gung is one of the actual treasures of Mantis boxing. It's one of the things that has actually come down from that earliest generation. So the division of our two styles. So it definitely has merit. There's benefits to practicing it. It should be preserved on its heritage basis alone. And as I said, it's probably one of the things that we can say is actually the link between the modern day Mantis and the actual archaic, or at least from the Shengshao Daoren generation. So I'm glad there are people who are practicing it and passing it on. You know, and actually, to be honest, when I first started going to Shandong, there were a lot of families that, although they had the manuscript, they actually didn't know how to practice it, or they practiced a truncated version, missing some, depending on the pages that they had missing from their Tremple, and this, that, and the other, and some people who said they could but actually couldn't. So actually, there was people practicing it always, but it was actually quite guarded. So I think it was actually more widespread, the practice in Shanghai, in Hong Kong, and even Southeast Asia. I think it was still guarded, but I think you actually find that overall, originally, or in the earlier days, there were more people that had it in those.
But they weren't calling it Qigong. And those
always, Lohan Gung, they always...
Lohan Gung.
Qigong, the term Qigong is a new thing. So it was, Shiva Lohan Gung. So, yeah, it was... and they've had it for a long time. And actually, I know that there was some Hong Kong masters that went to China in the 80s and 90s who exchanged material with mainland masters. And basically, one of the things that they did actually send back the other way was Lohan Gung. So people there had a residual knowledge of it, or some of them knew it all. But there was a few key masters who didn't know it and knew that it was important because they had it in their manuscripts, but it wasn't passed down. So, as a matter of fact, some of it went back.
What about your own teacher? Not a big practitioner of it.
No. My teacher that died did practice it, but didn't teach me because I wasn't interested. And then the teacher that I currently am still with. Didn't practice it, practices other forms of Qigong, but as I said, his teacher was completely against it, and he himself, who came from a professional sports background, also is a bit of skeptical about it, but his older brother actually practices various methods, including this exact Lohan Gung. So, you can find it in Shandong here and there and variations of it. I actually prefer the Sanhui Jiujuan, the 3 return, what is it, 3 returns, 9 rotation one that Will was talking about. It's got the beating element. It's quite a simple routine. I've seen it a million times. I've never formally learnt it. I've learnt extracted components of it. So it has value, but just I'm not the expert on it. I'm not passing it on. Thank heaven someone is, because it is important. But yeah, I don't know. Right. I don't know too much about it.
Okay, well that's the end of the questions, and I mean we're almost at 2 hours. It's been a great discussion. Is there anything you guys want to add? Anything you wanted to discuss? Or
we want to talk about his jiu-jitsu.
Keep that for another day.
Yeah, we're partitioning over here. Yeah.
Wait till I can actually do some jiu-jitsu before I talk about it.
All right. Well, there's you can go on YouTube and check this out. There's a whole bunch of videos called shit white belts say. So you should watch that because it's a good warning to know what not to say.
The good thing about jiu-jitsu, and I didn't want to talk about jiu-jitsu, is that unlike Mantis boxing, if you want an answer, you can actually go on YouTube or Instagram, and there's so much material. And with Mantis boxing,
too much material.
Traditional Chinese arts, there's too much, and you got to filter through the shit. But there is a lot of good stuff there. But it's not the same with traditional Chinese martial arts. It was so closely guarded for so long it's actually not a simple matter. Apart from forms, you can see X amount of forms, but if you're just seeing a form, you're not really getting anything unless you understand it. I don't understand it,
Yeah.
But yeah, so that is a big difference. It's much more hard to obtain the knowledge from Mantis boxing and many of these other styles. It takes years and it annoys a lot of people, and I think that's part of the reason why it's not even popular anymore. It's too closed. It's too hard to get the knowledge. It's impractical. I love that element of it, but to be honest, I don't. There are some things in it that are impractical that I reject, but I actually don't mind that kind of like all those special quirks about it, which make it annoying for other people who don't practice Chinese martial arts. I love it. I'll always practice it. I actually love that kind of shit, all the craziness and the weirdness, and
Yeah, no, it makes it special. It makes it worthwhile too. Actually,
it does.
Yeah. I mean, I did a video just a couple of weeks ago about the greater value of the practices on a whole, and I mean that's just. Once you've understood that part of it, it's probably with you for life. Doesn't matter.
Well, it's a disease. If you're infected, it's hard to.
Oh, that's right. It's like so we should compare Chinese martial arts to herpes. I mean, it's like
Except
that.
herpes goes away sometime, comes back.
No, you're never really done with it.
Yeah, true. Yeah. I think mine's an aggressive cancer, but yeah.
Okay, guys, it's been a great discussion. I think people will find it informative. We've I think put out a lot of stuff here and discussed a lot of Mantis aspects that I think a lot of people are curious about and don't know about. So this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me on.
I'll put your usual contact methods in the show notes. So if anybody wants to argue with you about any of your answers or otherwise, they can.
If anyone wants to fly us overseas to train with them in their country, feel free.
All right, cool.
Yeah. All right, nice one. Except for Will might be busy training jiu-jitsu, but he can fit it in.
All right, guys, thanks so much, and you guys have a good evening.
See you later.
Bye-bye.